I'm Sasha Woods, 32, and I don't fight security guards, I count down clocks. The boardroom is glass on three sides, the skyline a promise they used to whisper about over coffee. Alina Woods, my sister, slides into Dad's old chair and says, "Your services are no longer required here." Gerald Turner, the independent board chair, taps a pen like a gavel. Caroline Voss, the head of communications, watches the cameras as if they were mirrors. Caleb Morton, the chief financial officer, keeps his eyes on the spending sheets, not me. Two guards step forward. The air conditioner hums, phones click. Someone in reception has lilies on the desk and the room smells faintly of them. I let them escort me past framed covers and interns with damp eyes. My throat burns, but my face doesn't crack. I'm smiling because I've already started the 30-day clock on every name, logo, and character they use. 30 days until the fall gala. That's not a threat, it's arithmetic. Before I tell you everything that led up to this and how I made an entire company regret firing me, tell me where you're listening from in the comments, city and country. Subscribe and switch on notifications for more family revenge stories. I want to read your names while I wait. I built this thing from 2 rented rooms and a stubborn promise. Dad left me a name on a lease and a pile of goodwill, nothing fancy, just a scrappy media shop that paid the bills because people liked what we made. I turned that heartbeat into a drumline. We started with a single show recorded on a borrowed camera, a coffee-stained schedule taped to the wall, and a crew who stayed because they believed in doing right by the audience. My days got tidy. Script approvals at 6 a.m., talent calls at 8, sponsor checks around noon, and midnight edits that smelled like cold pizza and possibility. I learned that if you put the talent first, if you pay crews on time and answer emails before dinner, the work follows. We never promised miracles, we promised on-time shows, honest hosts, and respect for the audience's trust. That discipline built billboards, ad partners, a packed studio calendar, and a reputation that advertisers would bet on. I designed the brand so every show name pointed back to a single clean identity. It made negotiations simple and products recognizable. I set up simple agreements, calendars that people could read, and a calm rhythm for releasing new seasons. When a deadline tightened, we tightened up together. When a guest canceled, we found a better one. The visible markers of growth, our logos on buses, the merch lines, the little plaque in the lobby honoring long-tenured producers didn't happen by magic. They happened because someone was there every night, making the phone calls, defending the paycheck, pushing back when a sponsor wanted a shortcut. Early on, Alina began to like the stage lights more than the ledger books. She loved applause and donor dinners. I loved the engine room and the people inside it. I kept the engine running. Alina, my sister, and I were a pair of habits sewn together by childhood. I covered her mistakes, she took bows. Mom always told us to be generous, and so I was, often to my own expense. Dad loved Alina's easy charm and the way she worked a room. He'd beam while I fixed a busted mic in the wings. We agreed on outcomes, success, a name that mattered, a legacy, but not on methods. She wanted headlines and speeches, I wanted systems and payout schedules. As the company grew and the headlines followed, the gap between us widened. Alina charmed donors and flashed future plans. I kept vendors paid in 2 weeks and refused to bend promises to hit an investor's calendar. She loved saying, "We'll take this global," and I loved making sure we could afford to do that without cannibalizing the crew payroll. She didn't see the work the way I did. To her, numbers were applause, to me, numbers were people. She told board members we needed a fresh face in leadership while pointing to metrics I had produced as proof. That sting was strange, praise and erasure in the same breath. She wanted the chair Dad left when he retired. I wanted the work to last beyond both of us. We argued quietly at first about budgets and comment lines, then more loudly when money and image became currency. The pattern from our childhood kept repeating. She learned the light, I learned the engine. I protected her when we were younger because the hallways of middle school were cruel, and I meant to protect the work the same way. Only now, the person I protected shoved me out into the lobby. Months before the vote, I put quiet insurance in place. I moved the crown jewels, show names, logos, character rights, and key app ideas into a simple holding company under my control. I didn't do it to start a war, I did it in case one came. People think ownership sounds legal and cold. For me, it was practical. If the building upstairs became a house of sudden decisions, the art would have a life raft. Natalie Price, my IP attorney and confidant, helped set it up cleanly and quietly. Natalie explained it simply: the names are licensed to the company month to month. That way, if something blew up, the shows wouldn't be lost in a messy scramble. The permissions were scheduled to renew at month end by my signature, one-line notices, no drama. I recorded every renewal, every memo, and set calendar reminders like small alarms. I didn't hide what I did from everyone. I listed permissions on renewal calendars and treated them as routine. I wouldn't blackmail anyone or throw tantrums. My rule was simple: document, date, and deliver on time. 30-day cycles meant transparency and responsibility. They also meant a way to pause the machine if the machine tried to run without its guardrails. That pause is arithmetic, not revenge. It was meant as an emergency break for the art and the people who made it. When Alina forced the board vote, that break became a tool. I knew precisely what would happen if I counted down the days and didn't renew, and I was ready to see the consequences in the open air with the city watching. Ava Brooks, our flagship host, trusts my notes the way old friends trust each other. When she gets nervous about a monologue, she calls me and we walk through tone and truth. She never lets sponsors change her voice, and I've never asked her to. Marcus Hale, the investigative host, is intelligent and restless. He hates being told what to cover and hates being asked to pick a side. He once stayed after a taping and said, "You taught me how to chase facts, not headlines." Nora Blake is a media darling who shows up with perfect hair and a blunt question. She has the kind of laugh that bends a room, and she'll call me when a guest needs protection or a segment needs a conscience. Paul Bennett in ad sales understands the numbers and the people behind them. He calls me when a partner is nervous and asks, "Will you deliver?" And I answer honestly, because trust, once lost, is the hardest thing to get back. Caleb Morton, our chief financial officer, watches ledgers the way some people watch the weather. He notices patterns other folks miss, and he hates reckless spending the way a mechanic hates loose bolts. He's not loud about it, he's steady, precise, and he saved us more than once with a quiet email flagged urgent. These people, Mia, Lucas, Ava, Marcus, Nora, Caleb, Paul, are not assets on a balance sheet. They're the reason our shows breathe. When The Office hums or when the edit bay sings with a finished cut, it's because they showed up and did their part. I owe them transparency, and I owe them a plan if the lights suddenly go out. The fall gala was the kind of event everyone polished for: donors in suits, a ballroom of cameras, and a press list that read like a who's who of the city. Alina started talking about fireworks and splashy packages months before. She wanted a show-stopping night and a budget to match. Caroline Voss, head of communications, loves a headline. She planned words before the runway was secured. Gerald Turner, the board chair who likes tidy narratives, warmed to Alina's pitch because it sounded like growth in a sound bite. Meanwhile, things started to slip backstage. Caleb texted me one afternoon, late payments trending up. "Can we talk?" He wasn't dramatic, he just circled the dates and sent them like a weather report. I noticed more vendors asking for shorter payment terms and more requests for prepayment. It's not glamorous to watch a calendar for late invoices, but that calendar tells you where the building's stomach is getting queasy. Rumors began to circulate as quietly as coffee steam. Assistants whispered about a vote. Someone left a meeting invite with the word realignment in the title. I didn't react publicly. Instead, I set small, practical alarms. A 30-day timeline on an old renewal here, a note to Natalie about a calendar reminder there. I started counting the days toward the gala like an architect counting down to a build deadline. Counting isn't desperation. It's clarity. It keeps the hands at the wheel steady when other people want to slam the gas. I knew that if they rushed to replace the old shows with new names and glitter, the work would fray. That thought made my jaw clench at midnight when I checked emails under a lamp and heard the city traffic hum through the studio window. The board meeting smelled like corporate coffee and the kind of confidence that comes from wearing a new suit. Alina gave her speech about modernizing leadership the way a person pitches a product, smiles, rehearsed applause, a timeline. Gerald Turner called the vote after she finished, tapping his pen the way someone beats a rhythm. She framed it kindly. She said I was a visionary founder who'd choose to step back and focus on creative direction, which is a gentle way to say you're out of operations. The room leaned into that story, hands raised one by one. I felt my throat catch, but I didn't let it show. There was a hum in the walls, the cameras on, the feeds up, and somewhere beyond the glass floors people watched. The motion passed. My executive badge would be flagged, doors would stop opening, and the building would begin to believe the new narrative. Security walked toward me with the professional calm of people who escort anger and heartbreak out of rooms every day. I watched a sea of faces, interns whose time cards I'd signed off on, producers with framed covers on the wall that I'd fought for, the receptionist with her hand at her lips mouthing "I'm sorry." I didn't lash out. I didn't plead. I smiled. It wasn't a smile that hid fear, it was a measured thing, like a chess player removing a piece before the opponent realizes the endgame. My eyes found Caleb's across the room. He held a paper between his fingers, the corner soft from chewing. His look said what the spreadsheets said. They'd gambled with spend that didn't match the runway. I let the guards lead me past the framed covers I'd once sketched ideas for in the lobby. I let them guide me through the open-plan office where laughter and deadlines used to live. I walked through the hum of the air conditioning and the soft click of phone cameras, past the scent of lilies again at reception. I texted Natalie. "Timer's active, notices tonight." She replied with a thumbs-up heart emoji that felt like a legal nod and a friend's blessing all at once. The walkout is always longer than you think. People think the moment you leave a room the story ends, but the walk is a ritual. You pass the places you fixed coffee for, the bulletin boards with sticky notes of triumphs, the tiny desk where a junior editor keeps a plant that refuses to die. Caroline tried to trap my gaze for the camera. She wanted a line, a meltdown, a soundbite. I gave her nothing. Alina performed concern the way an actor performs an emotional beat. Hands placed just so, voice softened for the footage. I heard footsteps behind me and the soft metallic thunk as the security badge on my hip lost its access. I felt the lobby door push against the skyline air and the city felt too loud for a second. I sent quick messages in the small talk window of my life. To Mia, "Don't quit, pencil down for now." To Lucas, "Hold the files offline." To Ava, "Finish ode shows. No new promises." To Marcus, "Listen, not react." Each message was a tiny peg in the scaffolding I was building. I kept my phone in my palm like a compass. My breathing was calm. I left without shouting, without making a scene. I stepped into the elevator and watched the building recede through glass like a stage curtain. The smile stayed on my face because I was already counting 30 days to the gala, 30 days to either renewal or a new beginning. The immediate effect was a quiet panic at first, like a kettle on low heat. Interns whispered in Slack channels. Producers texted me to ask if they should keep working on scripts that used the old names. Some department heads called asking for clarity. Paul in ad sales called first thing. "Are the shows safe?" he asked. I told him plainly, "They're safe if we sit down and make a plan that keeps them safe." He sighed with relief, and I could hear the numbers clicking in the background. Advertisers need certainty like mothers need coffee. Caleb, who hates drama more than most, texted a spreadsheet with circled dates and a single line, "Payroll in 8 days, late invoices growing." His message felt like an anchor thrown into the water. I asked him to keep the numbers coming but to stay off the record. I called Ava to tell her not to promise new appearances or extensions on camera until we had clarity. She answered, "I trust you," and then asked, "Can you protect my people?" I said I would. I reached out to Mia and Lucas in short messages. "Hold files offline, don't post. We'll decide together." They replied with short emojis, 2 hands, a heart, a tiny flame, and then went quiet to do the work. Caroline, Alina's head of communications, released a tidy narrative before my day was done. Her memo to a handful of friendly outlets called me withholding brand assets, a neat villain line that fit neatly under a banner headline. The media loves a story with a clear hero and villain. Alina surfaced on a morning show the next day with practiced concern. Creative differences, she said, the words like air quotes. Sasha will focus on creative from offsite. The spin was ready-made. I'm unreasonable, she's saving the brand. Advertisers began to ask questions. Some paused new buys. A couple of mid-tier sponsors delayed their fall placements. The money wasn't gone, but timing mattered. Paul called me to say 2 partners wanted written assurance before running new spots. The board sent me a letter demanding I renew without conditions. It was bland and urgent, the kind of note families use before they threaten lawyers. I replied with the same 3 agenda items I'd mentioned in my first notices: renewals, a path to stability, and spending discipline. No slams, no melodrama, just a doorway. I didn't want cheap applause online. I wanted a meeting where people said what they'd do and when. That calmness was my public shape. I wanted the story to be about facts and choices, not a meltdown. Caroline escalated by seeding a rumor that I was doing this out of spite, an easy headline for a freelance writer hunting a trend. Alina doubled down, telling a friendly interviewer that I was holding the brand hostage. The spin worked on a few pages that measure clicks by outrage. Interns who'd once left me sticky notes about deadlines started whispering, "Is she cruel?" A few fair-weather influencers piled on. I didn't answer the noise. Instead, I posted a single clear message to my personal page: dates, slides, and the meeting link. No name-calling, no drama. The clarity slowed some of the chatter. People like facts when their jobs depend on them. Mia told me someone in design asked her to create a new logo family as if her work could be replicated on demand. She forwarded the email like a small wound. "They want it by tomorrow," she wrote. I told her to refuse politely and to file the request in a folder we'd use for any audit later. Lucas called at midnight. "They want my animators to freelance off-book." He sounded tired and angry in equal measure. I told him to protect the team. "Don't let them work for free under a new name," I said. He promised to shut down the off-the-record gigs and to keep files secure. The company tried to move fast, a rushed creative request here, a quick rebrand attempt there. They were trying to replace the irreplaceable in less than 30 days. I watched people I cared about get squeezed by wishes and deadlines. A middle vendor withdrew a promotional slot because they didn't want to sit on inventory for a brand that might not be allowed to use our names. A small stage I had booked as a backup taping location canceled after pressure from someone on Alina's side. A trusted editor accepted a buyout and left to get out of the crossfire. These were practical hits, things you could measure in hours and dollars, not just feelings. I adjusted. I published a countdown page called Countdown Gala Pivot and logged every call and promise. I moved from soft notices to a firmer timetable publicly visible to anyone who cared to look. I rented a small, honest studio across town, soundproof booths, 2 edit bays, a small kitchen where people could pour coffee without pretense. It was cheap, but it was ours. I outlined a strict launch plan that could keep shows alive if the company went forward without respect for process. A rescue feed, talent-driven mini-episodes, animated shorts, content that respected the audience and the creators without pretending to be the old machine overnight. I called Paul in ad sales and told him we'd protect advertisers' placements and deadlines. He needed that guarantee to move his buyers. He asked for a simple promise. If an advertiser moved slots to the rescue feed, could I guarantee delivery? I answered yes and began sketching a plan. Natalie, my attorney, told me to keep everything transparent and documented. "No dramatic leaks," she said. "Just dates and proof." I agreed. I also set a rule for myself: I wouldn't trash Alina publicly. I wouldn't fling private emails on social media or invent scandals. My approach was to show proof, show dates, and offer a path back if they wanted it. That was both a moral line and a tactical one. If I became the loud person, people would stop listening. Calm tends to carry credibility when everyone else is shouting. I tightened my inner circle to a handful of people who could move quietly: Natalie for legal rhythms, Mia for visuals, Lucas for production, Ava and Nora for talent alignment, Caleb for true numbers, and Paul for advertiser bridges. We worked in small rooms, on coffee, and with the kind of patient grind that makes content. The cost was real. A couple of sponsors delayed payments, and that pushed payroll timing into a tight window. A leased stage canceled. An editor left, but we accepted the cost rather than compromise the work. We simplified, pared down, and focused on what we could control. I slept little and thought a lot. The plan was no longer just a theoretical lever. It was a living thing. We were ready to show that a brand is more than a logo on a backdrop. It's the people in the edit bays, the host who refuses to sell out, the designer who draws the little details that make an audience care. If they wanted to play with that, they would find out quickly how much of the machine needs hands that choose care over spin. At first it was smaller things, changes to a graphic here, a different lower third on a clip there, almost invisible. Then they asked production to fast-track an entire launch schedule. They wanted pilots cut, promos retooled, and merch sketches completed on a timeline that ignored the people who actually made these things happen. Caleb sent me notes in the quiet times. They've started rush invoices. New vendors, higher fees. The numbers felt like someone turning up the heat under a pot. The most painful part was watching people I cared about get ordered to copy the look without the team who created it. Mia got texts asking if she would consult on brand. She read them aloud to me in the small studio across the street and laughed like a sound that was too tight for her chest. They want us to ghost our work, she said. They want the product without the hands. Designers tried to mimic Mia's sketches and came up with parodies, nice in a vacuum but lifeless in the air. Production rushed and missed tiny beats that are the secret of good television, like giving a host an extra half-minute before a big line so she can breathe. Lucas's animators were called for freelance visual fills at odd hours. People on the floor started to look like they were caught in a tug-of-war, told to do something ambitious while being denied the time and respect to do it well. The morale dip happened in small ways. A joke stopped landing in a writer's room, a meeting where someone who used to laugh didn't. A junior producer who used to stay late started packing up at 6. Fear crept in like a background hum. You could feel it in the coffee machine line, in the way a crew member hesitated to sign up for an extra shift, in the way people started whispering about saving their resumes. Alina's team called it momentum. The people living inside the work called it panic. She ordered a flashy vendor to prep a launch party theme that would cost more than a month's worth of basic production supplies. Caroline framed it as a necessary investment in a brighter image and sent colorful decks to donors. To the board, it looked like showmanship. To the staff, it looked like gambling with the things that kept us going. I kept my head down and my calendar open, counting the days left. The more noise they made, the more obvious it became that they were manufacturing speed because they didn't have patience to rebuild. Speed can look impressive on a podium, but it shows every seam. If you take a stitch out of a sweater and try to patch it too fast, the whole sleeve unravels. That's what I was watching. Loyalty got tested in ways that make you count every relationship twice. Marcus got whispered offers, a special investigative series if he stayed. It was the kind of offer that makes someone feel seen and tempted. He called me and said they offered me something shiny. I heard the fatigue under his words. I told him simply, do what the work needs, not what's easiest for your slate. He paused, then said, I'll think about it. Ava came to me in the small kitchenette at the studio with her coffee cup wrapped in both hands. I'm with you, she said, and then added, but I can't abandon my crew. That was reasonable and honest. I told her what I had in mind, move as a unit, protect the paychecks, and she said she'd talk to her producers. Nora, blunt as ever, asked, if it blows up at the gala, do I get on stage with you? I said, yes, if you mean it. She smiled, the kind that made you trust someone immediately. Mia was the easiest and the hardest to hold. She was offered a consulting fee to pass on the visual language. She forwarded the email like a thin paper cut and said, "They want our soul for a weekend." I told her to refuse politely and to keep everything documented. Lucas's team got late-night calls pitching off-book gigs. He told me he'd protect his people by refusing to sign them up for work that didn't honor credits or pay. He sounded tired, but he also sounded stubborn, and I liked that in him. Caleb sent me a quiet, sanitized summary of spend and a line that said, "This is getting worse." He didn't want to be dragged into the drama, so his messages were the kind you have to read twice, brief, precise, and heavy. Paul called and said advertisers were asking if anyone could guarantee deliveries. He asked who in a crisis would deliver on promises. I told him the names of people who cared and would show up. He sighed the way someone checked a pulse and felt it still beating. It wasn't all steady. A few people made private deals and took them. That's life when families fight and rent is due. But several of my core crew chose to stay close and to help organize a backup plan. The choice each person made felt less like an act of betrayal or allegiance and more like a statement. Do you want to build with these hands, or do you want to bet on a faster show run that might leave people behind? The answers shaped the map of what we could do. Things started to slip away in small, specific ways that make your stomach drop. A mid-range promotional platform that had promised a large slot pulled out after a conversation with Alina's team. They didn't want to run a campaign that might be accused of using images and names under dispute. The cancellation had a ripple. A month's worth of planned spots needed to be redistributed and saved elsewhere. A stage I had quietly held as a backstop for night shoots got canceled when the venue heard pressure from upstairs. Someone promised them a bigger event and the venue flipped. We lost a trusted editor, the kind who never missed a cut and stayed through 30-hour edits because he took a buyout to get out of the crossfire. He left his desk with a potted plant and a stack of files. I watched him go and felt the loss as a fatigue in my chest. Those are the kinds of things you can measure: slots, stages, editors, but the harder losses are the ones you feel in the body. A junior producer who used to beam when a guest said something great now peeks at her phone too often, checking for a job lead. A sound engineer who had been saving for a family trip took a contract elsewhere for stability. I made calls that morning offering what I could: bridge payments, connections, small emergency checks. I knew money couldn't fix the moral damage, but I could keep a roof over someone's head. We tightened what we could control. Backups, offline files, redundant hard drives, a short list of places where our people could work without fear. We simplified our content plan to the bone and rehearsed the one live pivot we could execute if needed. Options narrowed like a hallway with doors slamming closed. The board started leaning on the brink of stronger language. They suggested taking action that sounded like courtrooms and depositions in the way board members talk when they're out of patience. I don't like that stuff. It's loud and slow and turns people into forms. I answered with the same calm: meet me, list your goals, and show the numbers. Alina spread a rumor that I'd beg to return if the money were right. I didn't respond to that because doing so would give the rumor life. Instead, I scheduled a series of coffees off-site, one-on-one with the people whose choices mattered most. No groupthink, no recorded town halls. Just chairs, strong coffee, and a quiet look at who would actually move with me. I asked Paul which advertisers would follow a rescue feed. He named 3 solid mid-sized partners who trusted delivery and the people who deliver it. Caleb told me the exact week payroll would be tight if we didn't secure 2 of those partners. That kind of truth is both brutal and clarifying. Suddenly the map of everything we could do shrank, but what remained was clearer. Talent who cared could move with me, 2 advertisers could buy us runway, and a small studio would hold the shows in the meantime. It was risk, but it was precise risk. There's an odd comfort in a narrowed map. You can see the edges and the steps forward. I scheduled coffees with Ava, Nora, Mia, Lucas, and a cautious chat with Marcus. I asked them to imagine what a new room would look like and how we'd keep people paid while we built it. We talked logistics in human terms, how many shoots a week, where to find sets, who would handle junior hires. I asked Paul to start soft commitments with those advertisers and Caleb to keep me honest about payroll timing. We chose a tighter, cleaner path because everything else had become a fog of promises and spin. The options left were fewer, but they were real. That was when the plan started to feel less like revenge and more like rescue, a stubborn, careful attempt to save what mattered and to give the people who built it a place to keep building. Gerald tried to loop me into late, private chats. He wanted a soft conversation with no witnesses. I declined. If you're going to make decisions that affect 1,000 people's paychecks, I'm not doing it in a room with no record. I told him I'd meet with witnesses and a simple agenda. He grumbled about process, but he signed the meeting request. I didn't take calls from board members who wanted guilt or gratitude. I kept my calendar public to a fault, and that was a kind of armor. I had a dinner with Dad the week after the vote. He pushed his plate around like he was nervous about what to say. He said, "Girls, please, legacy matters." I watched the way he said it, like he was trying to stitch the past to the present with a polite sentence. Mom at the end of the table reached across and put her hand on his sleeve. Mom said, "Be the bigger person, Sasha, please." Her voice was a soft plea, and it made my throat ache because being bigger used to mean taking the fall when Alina tripped. I looked at them both and said, being bigger doesn't mean being silent. If legacy means honoring the people who built things, then I owe them a defense. Dad's face folded like a map creased in the right place. He didn't argue. At home that night, I drafted a public line for my personal page that would look like patience and like steel. A transparent countdown with dates, a meeting link, and a short sentence. The art deserves integrity. I hit publish and felt a small relief, like a window opened in a stuffy room. The window didn't fix everything, but it let the air move. I called people one by one to lock in commitments, and each call felt like a lifeline. Ava said, "I'm with you," then added, "But I can't abandon my crew." Her voice tightened on the word crew, like she was already imagining what they'd need. I told her we would move as a unit or not at all. Nora, crisp and blunt, said, "If this blows up at the gala, I'm on stage with you." She laughed once, short and fierce, and it felt like a promise. Mia sounded tired but steady. "I'll rebuild the look," she said. "I can make something warm and honest without copying what they're trying to fake." Her hands always sound like that when she talks, like she's sketching mid-sentence. Lucas said he'd move the animation pipeline and protect his junior artists. He asked for assurances that credits and rates would be respected. I said yes, without hesitation. Those were the easy commitments, not easy because they were small, but because they were true. Caleb, who doesn't like to be loud, gave me what mattered, numbers and a reality check. "I can't jump," he said, "but I can give you true numbers. Vendors are nervous, payroll timing is tight in 3 weeks. His tone was flat, the way he keeps his face when the math is ugly. He did not ask for drama, he asked for truth. Paul in ad sales offered the kind of practical blessing I needed. 3 advertisers would move with us if I could guarantee delivery dates and brand safety. He didn't hand me the money, but he handed me the possibility. That was all you really need to start a thing. I started looking for a room like someone shopping for a band practice space. It didn't need to be pretty, it needed to be honest. A soundproof booth, 2 edit bays, a small conference table, and a coffee machine that would withstand 12-hour shoots. I signed a short-term lease on a floor in a building across town, sunlight in the morning, thin carpets, and a back stair that smelled faintly of paint. Mia painted the backdrops herself the first night, brush strokes slow and careful. She hummed a tune I couldn't place, the way people do when they're reclaiming something. Lucas moved templates and rendering machines and stayed until dawn, calibrating color so that nothing looked like an imitation of the old work. We bought secondhand lights and sent out a group text that said simply, "Pencils down for tonight, meet at 9 tomorrow." The studio felt like a home you build when the furniture is still in the moving boxes, temporary but ours. We built a strict launch plan because that's what you do when you can't afford glamour. We planned 3 tiers, a talent-led talk that felt like home, short animated pieces that could run between segments, and mini-docs about people our audience cared about. The point was to deliver things that mattered on time and with heart. We wouldn't pretend to be the grand old stage, we'd be real, steady, and fast enough to keep sponsors from panicking. The gala switch had to be surgical. I didn't want theatrics for the sake of spectacle, I wanted timing and proof. I set a midnight cutoff, an ordinary moment that would be hard to spin into drama. When the room toasted and the speeches wrapped, their screens would flicker and go dark across every broadcast point they controlled. I drafted the signal plan in plain language and practiced it once on a shaky phone line with Natalie. She told me to keep the phrasing simple, permission not renewed, no legalese, no fireworks, just a fact. Paul confirmed advertisers who would flip to a rescue feed if the screens went black. He wanted guarantees, so I gave him delivery promises in clear terms. A live window at noon the next day, the first 6 segments prepped and ready, ads slotted and pre-cleared. Natalie prepped a 3-slide set in plain words. What belongs to whom, what the notices said, and what renewal would require. I called Ava and Nora and rehearsed a line each: gratitude, clarity, and a small invitation: meet us, respect the work, or watch us build a future without forced shortcuts. That night I slept maybe 3 hours in a chair with the studio light on low, my phone charging beside me like a small ship. I dreamed of screens flicking and of people who work in edit bays smiling because they had the space to do their best. When I woke, I checked the countdown like a mathematician checking a sum. We could fail, I knew that, but failure would be honest and it would carry the truth in a way an empty theater never could. I told the team one rule: no public trashing. If this moment became about spectacle and finger-pointing, we'd lose the thing we were trying to protect, the audience's trust. We would show evidence, we would show the process, and we would offer a doorway back if they chose to walk through it. That was both mercy and discipline. It kept us sharp and kept the public square from becoming a circus. On the night before the gala, I walked the new room with Mia and Lucas. We put our hands on the mixing board, checked the mics, and stood in the dim light with coffee cooling in our cups. The place smelled like new paint and late work. I pulled my phone out and reread the messages that had come in over the last week: commitments, numbers, small notes of trust. Each one felt like a plank in a bridge we were going to build or burn. I didn't know which yet, but I did know this: I was choosing a bridge that led away from compromises and toward people who showed up for the work. That choice felt, in a way, like the only honest revenge, one that rebuilt instead of tore down. I sat at a table with Natalie and Caleb. Natalie had 3 printed slides folded like a small pamphlet. The paper made a tiny scrape sound when she turned the corner. Caleb wore the same steady face he wears when the numbers are messy, calm, precise, slightly strained. My phone was on the table with the countdown open. The small red numbers felt like a metronome between my thumb and the table. Around us, people smiled and clinked glasses. Servers in black moved like ghosts between legs of chairs, placing plates and tucking napkins with perfect timing. I felt the weight of the night like a thing you hold in your palm. Dad and Mom were sitting near the stage. Dad's jaw looked tired, and Mom kept one hand on his sleeve like a small anchor. Alina's speech was polished. The words we'd heard 100 times in meetings turned into a ribboned story for donors. She promised a new age with a new creative sweep and fresh energy. The audience liked the promise. They applauded when she said the right things. I watched the cameras pan to Caroline for a reaction shot. Caroline's face was curated for headlines. I felt no rush in my chest. Instead, I felt the collected focus of the room, like a held breath. Ava and Nora were in the wings, zipped into their evening dresses, hands steady. We had rehearsed one line each for the moment we planned, simple things that would carry truth without theatricality. At 10 minutes to midnight, the countdown on my phone ticked slower. I took a sip of water and tasted the lemon on my tongue from the cleaner in the room. Natalie leaned close and whispered the exact phrasing for the slide: permission not renewed. Meeting requests were declined. That phrasing was deliberate and plain. We wanted facts, not fury. Caleb passed a small folded page across the table, an extract of numbers, gentle and brutal in the way they showed where the spend had been reckless. Derek read it with an athlete's stoicism and then nodded like someone who keeps promises for a living. He didn't speak then, but the nod was enough. When the room began to toast and applause rose like a tide, the small red numbers hit 0. Screens across the ballroom and the satellite feeds we hadn't even imagined went dark in the same breath. For a second there was silence that rippled outward. Phones stopped recording, glasses paused mid-lift, and the hum of conversation fell into an audible gasp. Caroline's eyes widened. She waved at Tex with a clipped hand. The technicians ran for the control desk, flipping switches and whispering into headsets. Alina faltered, then smiled the way people smile when a script tells them to. Her voice tried to ride the silence, but the screens stayed off. The presenters under the chandeliers blinked into a new kind of stage light, the one that shows you a room without its props. I stepped forward slow enough that cameras could catch the movement and quick enough that no one could call a pause. Ava and Nora stood with me, one on each side, like 2 points of steady light. Derek handed a mic to me as if passing a baton. The mic felt like a small, heavy promise. I spoke simply, "The names and characters you love require valid permission." Tonight, that permission was not renewed. My voice was clear and steady, the kind of voice people use when they're telling a story they know is true. Behind me, Natalie clicked through slides, plain words, dates, and the copies of the notice I sent. Slide 1 said what a permission is in plain language. Slide 2 listed the dates and the meeting invitations. Slide 3 showed the path I offered, a meeting, a plan, and a way to honor the work. I didn't shout, I didn't sneer. I laid the facts on the table like bread. Alina grabbed a mic and tried to shout over the calm. "She's hijacking our night," she said, voice sharp. I let her finish and then answered without heat. "I'm protecting the audience from rushed replacements," I said. The microphones caught the small sounds of the room shifting, people leaning forward, a chair scraping, a faint cough. Gerald tried to reassert the board's authority in a clipped voice, but Derek lifted a hand. He said, "Let her finish, or I pull my pledge." His words landed like a gavel. Caleb, who had been quiet until then, folded a small packet of paper and moved through the crowd to hand it to Derek. It was a short summary of the spending that had worried him. There was no fanfare, just a handoff of the truth. Derek examined it with calm and then looked up at the crowd. I offered a simple choice: meet tonight with a clear agenda, respect the renewal process, put spending discipline in place, and preserve the crews, or I would launch our rescue feed at noon tomorrow with the talent people trusted. I said it plainly so it could be understood without spin. Ava and Nora each spoke one line. "We choose integrity," they said. The lines landed like flares. Cameras recorded every face in the room. The donors looked at one another. The reporters typed into devices with renewed focus. For a breath, nothing happened. Then Derek stood and stepped toward the mic. He said, slowly and clearly, "My support follows delivery and honesty. I back Sasha's plan to stabilize what the city knows and loves." The room shifted as if the floor had been nudged. 2 advertisers in the room reached for their phones and sent texts. Paul, who'd been on standby, got a single message and then nodded, eyes steady. Over the next few minutes, murmurs spread, supportive donors, advertisers asking how to move ad slots, and board members glancing at each other. The cameras caught Alina's face as it tightened, and Caroline's practiced composure showed a flicker. Alina tried to rally with bluster and a quick, rehearsed line about continuity, but the room had already heard the clearer voice. A few people applauded Derek's words, others whispered about contracts and delivery. I wrapped up with one sentence that needed no flourish: "At noon tomorrow, the stories continue with or without this stage." It was simple, unadorned, and true. The truth landed in the room like a bell. People who'd come for spectacle realized the evening had become a choice between rushing and respecting the work. Money follows stability more often than it follows drama. When I stepped down from the small riser, Ava hugged me like someone who had been holding a secret too long. Nora slipped her arm through mine and said, "We told you." Derek clapped me on the shoulder with the sort of warmth that felt like a contract signed with a look. Cameras kept rolling because nothing in modern life really stops when someone speaks. There were still feeds and hot takes and late-night columns being drafted in corners. But the power shifted in small, practical ways. Advertisers started moving slots to the rescue feeds line, the board's neat majority began to show cracks, and the people in the room who actually made the shows began to look at one another with something like relief. The gala that was meant to elevate Alina's new era ended up leveling a playing field, if only for a night, and showed the city that the work had hands that would not be hurried. I didn't answer the bait. Instead, I posted a calm thread. Dates, slides, copies of the notices, and an invitation to a meeting link. Plain facts, no performances. Natalie told me to keep the tone human and direct, no legal bluster, no threats, just information people could use. I kept repeating the same sentence because repetition is a kind of armor. I'm offering simple options: meet, make a plan, and protect the crews. My post slowed some of the noise. People who actually had to get work done are like that. They prefer clarity to a cliff. Donors who read the slides called Derek and he called me. Advertisers with real budgets wanted to talk specifics, not headlines, and Paul began to quiet the worst fears by moving 2 key slots to the rescue feed. Caroline's team didn't stop. They fed sympathetic reporters a few off-the-record lines. Sasha is using this as leverage. The phrasing was chosen for moral panic. It worked on a few click-driven sites. Some long-time viewers began to ask questions out loud on social channels. Why would a founder do this? I answered those questions directly in short videos that showed the work, the teams, and the timeline. I let footage of Mia drawing a character and of Lucas correcting an animation speak to what the brand actually was. Show the hands, not the fight. People understand hands. The backlash had small, sharp consequences. A local venue canceled a morning press availability because someone upstairs claimed security concerns. A few fair-weather sponsors paused payments while their legal teams chewed on press quotes. That kind of hesitation costs momentum. The staff group chats split into threads of fear and threads of hope. I kept writing back the same thing: if you choose to leave, I'll hire you. If you choose to stay, I'll pay you on time. Either way, you're not alone. It felt like a thin rope to toss into a storm, but ropes matter. Gerald and the board pushed back in their way, calm, formal, and loud in meeting minutes. They drafted an emergency motion asking for blanket permission to keep replaying gala content and to use the brand for internal promotions while we sorted things out. Their language tried to make everything sound bureaucratic, a safe fix. I read the request and thought about what it would mean: a temporary bypass that would keep the lights on but ignore the people who make the lights worth having. I refused to be rushed into a blanket solution that would make the problem invisible without fixing it. I did, however, grant a humane, narrowly tailored window, a 24-hour replay permission for what had already aired that night. It wasn't a concession so much as a practical act. People had watched, paid, and deserved to see what they saw. I made it clear I wasn't allowing new uses or edits without a meeting. Natalie drafted the note and I kept the wording in plain language: limited replay, no new launches, meet first. That balance mattered because it showed I wasn't trying to break the company. I wanted it to be honest. Caleb, ever the steady voice, sent a message that cut through the press noise: payroll is 7 days out, the spend keeps climbing. He didn't want drama on a public feed, he wanted a plan. Paul reported that 2 advertisers had already moved ad dollars to the rescue feed, and a third was asking for guarantees. Those were the practical levers we needed. Natalie told me to set a hard goal: stabilize the rescue feed within 48 hours or risk losing the momentum we had just gained. It was an ugly, hopeful deadline: 48 hours to prove we could deliver or watch the chance drift. We scrambled like a band that had lost its tour bus but still had a show to play. The tiny studio that had been a half-built plan became a hive. Mia painted backgrounds with her left hand because her right had a cramp. She worked until the strokes felt right. Lucas stayed in until morning, rendering openers and compressing files for quick upload. Ava recorded a 2-minute welcome that felt like home, no scripts, just her talking to the camera about why she loved the work and the people in it. Nora cut a tight cultural segment that would slot between pieces. We grabbed second-hand lights, set up folding chairs for sound monitors, and made a tiny green room where the crew could breathe. Paul rerouted ad buys with quick calls and promises of brand-safe placements. He negotiated with a calm that was mostly caffeine and muscle memory, advertisers like certainty, and he sold them the idea of delivery. Natalie wrote a public-facing FAQ with simple answers: what changed, what's allowed, how to get tickets to the new feed. It looked almost silly in its simplicity, but people needed it. The tech stack we had wasn't pretty. It was messy wiring and a lot of prayer. We rehearsed our first live cut twice and then again because rehearsal is insurance. I slept 2 hours on the studio floor and woke to Mia tapping on my arm with a grin. "We go in 10, she said, and the grin steadied me. When the feed went live, it was thin at first, 2 frames of animation, Ava's voice, a friendly card that said, "We're here." Then the second segment dropped and the ad spots ran on time. Paul sent me a single message: they moved. That one word felt like a small victory. It didn't win the war, but it showed the world an alternative could work without chaos. The family fallout was quieter and sharper than the public blast. Dad called first. His voice was small and practical. "Fix it," he said. It wasn't an order so much as a plea to stop a thing he could see was tearing us. I told him that I'd offered meetings and they'd been refused. He asked if I could come back without price. I told him no, if I came back without a plan, the thing would repeat. He was silent for a long breath and then admitted, "Maybe I liked the applause." That was more confession than I'd expected and softer than I wanted from him, but it was honest. Mom called next, voice fragile in the way only mothers' voices get when they're trying not to break. "Please apologize," she said. "Make it smooth, we don't need this in the family." The plea in her voice was a thing I had to manage like a teetering vase. If I told her I'd forgive too quickly, I'd let a pattern continue where I absorbed the cost. I answered, "Apologize for what, Mom?" "For protecting the people who make the work. For not letting a rushed plan run over a crew's pay," she cried, a small, startled sound. I told her I wasn't trying to hurt anyone, I was trying to keep promises. She whispered, "I just want you to be safe." Alina texted in the thin hours between press cycles. "You made me look small," she wrote. "It was a kind of smallness that left residue in your mouth, pride mixed with hurt." I typed back slowly because tone matters more than content in late-night messages. "You wanted the chair," I wrote. "I wanted the work to last. We crossed lines." The conversation stalled after that. No fireworks, only the cold ash of words that didn't close anything. I set a boundary with both of them that felt like a clean, necessary thing. No more family summits that ended in vague promises. No more midnight pressure calls. I would answer when asked with respect and truth, but I would not be dragged into a cycle where everyone left the room feeling better because I had taken the fall. Dad wanted legacy, I wanted people fed and trusted. Mom wanted peace, I wanted integrity. I offered them both something they could live with: come tour the studio, see the people who kept the shows running, and maybe understand what legacy actually looks like. It's not a chair with a plaque, it's the hands that keep the lights on. When I hung up, the room felt oddly empty and full at the same time. The city was noisy through the windows, the skyline unfazed. I picked up my phone and typed a note to Natalie: "Family's frayed, but the crew is here. I won't carry both anymore." She replied with a short heart and a plan, a polite press note that didn't drag the family into public clouds. I breathed out and felt the sharpness of choosing. Sometimes revenge isn't loud. It's choosing to protect the people who never asked for a spotlight and refusing to be the only one paying for courage. Marcus asked for a sit-down. He wanted to cover the fight, the truth, and he was worried about burning sources. I told him, "Tell the truth and protect people." He nodded, the way someone nods when they mean to be careful. A longtime producer called and asked if the studio could arrange a short-term loan to tide his small crew over until ad money flowed. I gave it with a written plan, not because I wanted obligations, but because I wanted people to know we'd try to look after each other. That producer dropped by the studio to hand me a thermos and say quietly, "You didn't have to do this, but I'm glad you did." I felt that as a kind of currency more valuable than money. Some people chose paycheck safety and left. A senior editor took a buyout and left with a box of mementos and a tight smile. I sent a care package weeks later because I wanted him to know there was no bitterness. Others stayed. Mia agreed to rebuild our visual language from scratch in the new room. She came in after hours and painted a mural on the wall with her phone playing a playlist she said she loved. Lucas stayed up with his animators, teaching them a new pipeline and insisting they took meals on rotation so no one skipped breaks. Ava negotiated to bring 3 of her trusted producers with her if she moved. Nora promised to keep her voice honest and to bring a younger correspondent she'd mentored. We also made a daily habit, 20 minutes in the morning, where we sat in a circle, one truth, one problem, one win. It was practical and human. Someone would say, "We need more mics," and another would say, "We got the mics, we're testing them at 2. It built trust in small increments. We wrote contracts that respected credits and fair rates, simple things we'd always promised but had to restate because new teams sometimes forget the old rules. We set a tone where if anyone felt pressured to do something unpaid or creditless, they'd tell us and we'd fight for them. There were moments of exhaustion. A junior producer would fall asleep at a desk and wake with a crick in her neck, and we'd all quietly bring her coffee. There were moments of joy too, first cuts that landed, a joke that made the room laugh, an animator who high-fived someone for a clean frame. Those moments mattered because they reminded us why we were rebuilding. Community and partners were quieter alliances that proved the truth of the work lived beyond our building. 2 nonprofits we'd spotlighted for years called me within a day and asked if they could still be featured. They said the stories we did helped them raise real money and their volunteers expected us. I scheduled them into our rescue feed because what good is a fight if people who depend on your show lose the lift it gives them? A small college reached out and asked if I could speak to a class on creative protection. I said yes and built a short talk about why names and rights matter and how creators deserve to be kept whole. Those small public classrooms helped me frame the argument in plain language for people who were not in offices with press machines. Paul secured a short campaign from a regional brand that believed in sustained delivery, not flash. They wanted to support a series about small business and community leaders. That placement bought us runway and also tied us to people whose lives were steadier than headlines. Natalie reminded me to keep things kind and clear when talking publicly about partners. Explain what changed, who's protected, and where people can watch, she said. That simplicity kept the message from getting tangled in legal words people hated. Caleb managed the calls from vendors who were nervous. He told them the truth without sugarcoating it. We might have a bumpy patch, but we intended to pay. Hearing that from him calmed more than one supplier who was ready to pull lines. In a way, community gave us oxygen that the press tried to choke out. Then Gerald floated a buyout. It came like a polite paper airplane, impressive in the air, light on landing. He proposed a number that looked flashy in a single line, the sort of figure tabloids love to repeat, and asked me to sign a clean document that would transfer permission to the company and let me step away. On the phone, he framed it as a generous exit, cash now, peace later. Elena added a sweetener in a private message. Sign and I'll say nice things about you on air. The offer sounded tempting if you only looked at the dollar. Mom texted, take it and rest, with 3 praying hands. Dad was quieter, his silence felt like an absent vote. I met Natalie at a diner near the new studio that evening and tore the offer apart like a menu. The number was flashy but shallow. It bought me a check, not the thing that kept people fed and credited and building. It ignored ongoing value, the ad cycles yet to come, the future seasons, the people who'd move with me if I stayed. It treated the shows like inventory, not like the lives and reputations of a crew. Natalie listened and smiled that knowing, patient smile lawyers have when they see a client choose gut over glitter. She asked a simple question. If you sell, will those shows keep their compass? I told her no. Selling would let the company do what it wanted with the names. They might honor rates for a while, but the pattern that got us here, rush, replace, and cut the corners, would likely continue. I thought about the junior editor who'd stayed because she believed in what we promised. I thought about the sound engineer with the newborn. I thought about reputation as a ledger of trust. I wrote back to Gerald with a polite decline. I won't sell the soul of the shows, I said. It wasn't melodramatic, it was honest. The number glinted in headlines for a day, then faded. The offer forced a different problem into the open, though it bounded the negotiation into cash terms when what I wanted was structural changes. Gerald and some board members wanted a tidy exit, a number to close the story. I wanted long-term care for people and the art. My answer tightened our path. It also made it clear I wasn't for sale. Derek called and asked to gather a small room, me, Alina, Gerald, Caleb, Paul, and Natalie. He wanted a calm space, no cameras, no grandstanding, just a last, honest conversation. We agreed on ground rules before the door closed. No shouting, numbers and dates only, and any decision that affected people would be documented in plain language. The meeting room smelled like old coffee and new paper. Caleb had a stack of printouts that looked unremarkable until you saw the numbers hand-fingered like a person's pulse. I set out my 3 things in plain terms: renewals with respect for the original agreements, a path that stopped reckless spend, and a clear protection plan for crews and vendors. Either they agreed to that, or we agreed to a clean split where my team could take the shows and the company could pursue other ideas. Caleb read out the spending report in a way that made it easy to follow: the places where money had climbed for big events, the items without clear return, the runway left. Gerald's face tightened a degree with each line. Paul spoke next, practical and less theatrical than any board member. Advertisers prefer stability. He told the room that brands didn't want to be in the middle of a family fight. They wanted delivery. If you want us to keep buying, show us how you'll deliver on time and honestly, he said. Derek leaned back and ran a hand along his jaw. He sounded like someone weighing a horse before buying. The city cares about the work, he said quietly. We need results and respect. Alina offered a partial fix: promises of oversight committees, new hires in operations, and sweet, scripted apologies on air. It felt like reheated soup. She offered boxes that looked like solutions but didn't have the binding inside that would keep the promises. I listened and then said calmly, no more fig leaves. I explained that public promises without structural change have a shelf life. I offered the split: I keep the names and characters and they keep the stage and the brand as it is. Conditions were simple and clear: anyone who wants to move with me can do so, credits and pay stay intact. We agree to give each other space. Natalie wrote the terms as we spoke in plain, human sentences. We weren't going to sign a million pages of legalese at that table. We were going to agree to a statement that said who takes what and how to treat people who move. Gerald read it twice, then signed. The paper slid across the table like a small truce. Alina looked at the page, then at me, and stormed out without saying goodbye. Mom texted an emoji broken heart and Dad sent a single line, proud either way. The room held a kind of awkward, quiet relief. The split wasn't the end of anything so much as a rerouting. We had chosen borders so we could all get on with our lives without the slow bleed of conflict. When I left that room, I felt the weight of the choice settle into my shoulders like a sensible coat. I had declined a shiny offer and chosen a harder path: keep the work, keep the people, and build something honest again. It felt, in a way, like choosing the long view over the easy bank deposit. The hard path had costs, but it kept the team whole, and in the end, that's what mattered. Gerald signed first, like a man ending a long argument by putting his name on a paper. Alina didn't sign. She stood, slung a coat over a shoulder, and left the room without saying goodbye. Mom texted a broken heart emoji, Dad texted, proud either way. The paper slid across the table like a quiet truce. I felt relief, but also the exact sharpness of what we'd chosen. A longer road, more nights of no sleep, but a path where the people who made the shows would still be honored. That was the point of no return. Once you choose people over a quick check, you can't go back and compress values into a single payment. The split meant we were committed to building again from the ground up with the crew intact. Launch day felt like watching a plant push through concrete. We went live with a steady pulse, not fireworks. Ava opened with a monologue that wasn't polished for ratings so much as honest. She talked about why she'd trusted those 10 years with us and why she was here now. Her voice carried like something real into people's living rooms. Nora's first segment after the switch featured a small artist we'd always meant to give a platform to, a potter who ran a free community workshop, and the response was immediate. People messaged that they'd learned something and that it made them want to call their own neighborhood centers. Those reactions mattered. They reminded us that our job was to amplify people, not personalities. Mia's new visual language landed warmly. Her designs weren't flashy, they were careful, full of small details that made the segments feel like home. Lucas's animation became a thing people noticed in comments, little touches that made the short intros feel handcrafted. We credited junior artists up front because names matter and recognition is a form of payment. The rescue feed turned into a small channel with a regular schedule. A morning short, 2 interviews, an afternoon mini-doc, and a nightly wrap. Paul kept his promises, advertisers saw delivery and paid on deadlines. The numbers were modest at first but steady, and that kind of steady is a better foundation than a single big weekend spike. There were costs attached, obvious and private. I paid staff with borrowed runway and promises we all trusted each other to keep. I missed a friend's wedding I'd vowed to attend. The plane ticket sat in my email like a small accusation. I slept in the studio a lot, waking to the hum of servers and to Mia painting backgrounds while the kettle boiled. A senior producer took a safer job and left. I called him and said thank you and sent a care package that felt like the smallest possible gratitude. Some viewers mourned the old stage. I answered their messages honestly and invited them to meet the people who now made the shows. That quiet human contact turned critics into curious listeners more often than I expected. Mom and I finally set a coffee date, and this time we left business off the table. She asked about sleep and health and small things I'd forgotten to care for while we were building a fight. Dad came by the new studio with his old keys in a pocket, and his face softened when he saw the edit bays humming and the junior editor who used to leave sticky notes now editing full segments. He said, "Show me what you did," and I gave him a tour without an argument. That warmth was its own currency. I started mentoring a young host who reminded me of my 22-year-old self, eager, stubborn, and honest. We sat in a little corner of the studio and sketched out questions she should always ask, the ones that protect a story from being sold cheap. Revenge, it turned out, looked a lot like stability. It wasn't a headline or a public takedown. It was paying people on time, crediting their names, and delivering content that treated audiences like citizens, not consumers. The cost was real: sleep debt, a few lost friendships, a slower bank account. But those costs were small compared to the price of letting people who did the work vanish under new logos and quicker timelines. I walk through the new glass-walled room now, and the skyline looks the same, but this time the keys are in my pocket. The interns at the front desk know my name without having to look it up. The screens show our shows in a slow rotation, and the hum of the air conditioning sounds like the steady pulse of a place that keeps promises. I remember the walkout, the long corridor, the framed covers, the security badge that stopped unlocking doors, and I remember the smile I held then. I smile again now, but it's different. It's softer, satisfied, and hollowed by the things we lost and filled by the things we kept. I text Natalie, no more countdowns. Just calendars. She replies with a short, laughing emoji and a plan for next quarter. I send a group message, payday confirmed. Thank you for carrying this with me. The studio sign flicks on under my hand, and the room hums to life the way a heart finds its rhythm after a fall. If you've ever been pushed out of something you built, tell me your story in the comments, city and country. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and keep listening. We have more family revenge stories coming, and they all start with someone choosing people over easy wins.